Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you be part of our panel, which is going to be practices for high-performing and inclusive workplaces. My name is Adam Moore. I am the Society Chair for TAG's D&I Society, and I'm also the Senior Manager for Truist Supplier Diversity Program. I am joined today by three esteemed panelists as we're going to have a conversation around practices for our high-performing and inclusive workplaces. So with that, let me introduce to you today's panelists. First, joining us from my home bank, if you will, is Wendy McSweeney. Wendy, would you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do for the bank and one interesting fact that people might not know about you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Adam. My name is Wendy McSweeney, as you mentioned, and I am the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. I've been with the bank for about 7 years and have spent the past 23 years in financial services between three organizations. One fun fact about me is I love birthdays. I lost both of my parents. They were very young. And so I celebrate my birthday, your birthday, everyone's birthday. I share my birthday with my brother, who's 4 years younger than I am, my maternal aunt, and 15 other people that I know personally. There's also an album by Charles Webster called Born on the 24th of July.
Well, there you go. I love that fact. I love that. So anyway, mine's March 27th, just so you can put me in your repertoire. That would be fantastic. Then joining us from E&Y, we have Miss Jelisa Stubs. Jelisa, please introduce yourself today.
Yes, so thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. So Jelisa Stubs, I've been with EY for about 10 years now. I'm a senior manager and I work in our financial services practice, and I serve as the D&I leader for the Truist account. And my fun fact is that since we're wrapping up October and my 1 year anniversary is coming up, so I am a breast cancer survivor. And so I am coming up on my 1 year anniversary of remission November 14th. So I thought I'd share that with you guys.
That is an awesome fact. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being so brave about that. That is awesome. And then last but not least, Stephen Ichatha from Google. If you'd please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for having us. I'm extremely honored to be part of this panel. I'm Stephen Ichatha, and I'm with Google. I've been with Google 3 years. My current role at Google is deploying network infrastructure for our data centers, which then help serve the cloud for the world. I find it hard to compete with the facts that have been given by the rest of the panelists. So maybe, Adam, I'll ask you whether you think this is true or false.
Okay.
My maternal grandfather, had 8 wives. As a result, I have probably 400, 500, 600 cousins of whom I don't know. True or false?
I think I'd rather you ask me if the suit made you look fat or not, to be honest with you. I'm going to go with true, though.
That is, in fact, true. Fun fact, I was born and raised in Kenya, and my maternal grandfather had 8 wives, and as a result, I have multiple uncles, aunties, and cousins, nephews, nieces, and truly all over the world.
That's amazing. I have to say, I mean, if the fun facts are this good, I can't wait to get started with this panel. I have had conversations with all of you. I cannot wait. So let's just jump right in and start talking about the topic today. So the first question I'd like to kind of throw out, and I'm gonna throw this out to all three of you. You know, we hear a lot about the value of having a highly inclusive workplace. But in your opinion, what are some of the more intangible benefits that a company might see by ensuring that they have an inclusive workplace? Wendy, why don't you kick off that question for us?
Sure, Adam. So, of course, we all know tangible is profitable growth because organizations that have diverse boards, leadership, and teammate populations have exponentially higher growth than homogeneous organizations. But some of the intangibles include your ability to innovate, because when there's diversity of thought around the table, studies show that you get greater innovation and productivity, as well as your ability to retain talent. If your teammate population feels like they work in an environment that values them as an individual, you get higher productivity out of them. And then tied with that is the ability to recruit. We all talk about work when we get home, whether it's positive or negative. And if your culture creates that such that your teammates feel like their valued contributions to the organization, they talk about that at home. And whether their friends and family members or circles want to work with you, otherwise they want to do business with you. Jelisa?
Man, you covered off on all of the main ones. You didn't leave me any to go with. But no, one of the things that I think that is an intangible benefit, and even probably more important now that we are in this remote environment around it, is making people feel as though they are valued. And when you feel, one of those intangibles about being inclusive, and if people feel valued, they are going to bring their better selves. And where we are already having times where we're not able to, necessarily connect with people as we would in person, that value and that personal connection is only as authentic as it is when you were in the office. So being included and asking people how they're doing, how they're really doing, is probably one of the bigger things that I think is the intangible benefits that we're seeing now in our remote environment. And then as we settle into what this new normal will be, it'll become more important. So for me, I think it's that peace of mind and that personal value that people feel, in particular in service business, such as a lot of us are here. What do you got, Stephen?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, plus 1,000 to everything you said. There's the tangible and intangible. Adam, you're asking about intangible. The question I'll throw back is, if there's no inclusion, what happens to your company? How do people feel when they come in and the company touts DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? We have a diverse workforce. We have systems in place to guarantee equity, but then people don't feel included in meetings. They don't feel like they have a voice. They don't feel like they can innovate. They don't feel like they can provide value to the company. And these are people who are spending majority of their time in the workplace. Inclusion is the most significant construct of DEI. It is important. It is something that needs to be systematically in place. It drives innovation. At TAG, we talk about inclusion driving innovation. There's no innovation without inclusion, because then there's no voice that gives value to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, no, those are fantastic answers. Thank you, guys. So, Wendy, thinking oftentimes those who are racially and ethnically diverse feel almost invisible in today's workplace, and that their talents aren't recognized by leadership. What are the things that you're doing in your organization to help those who are racially and ethnically diverse feel that they haven't been overlooked?
Yeah, great question, Adam. And I'm really proud to share that Truist is the combination of BB&T and SunTrust. And as we brought the organizations together starting in February of 2019, we led with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensuring that there was a shared focus around diversity throughout the organization. And so our teammates had an opportunity to see that. We have BRGs, business resource groups. I'm sure many organizations have those. But we've tied our executive leadership team to the business resource groups, and they are actively engaged with the membership. One of the things that we did in May of this year was to host bold and courageous conversations where our executive sponsors spent time learning some of the myths, the challenges, and real opportunities that these different groups felt they had inside of their organization. And then we took that information back, and on May 26th, we spent a full day talking about those opportunities and how do we remove those roadblocks so that our teammates not only hear that it's important to us, but they actually see it and feel it. In the realm of what, is now being called the George Floyd era, we doubled down on that, and we've had 300 different bold and courageous conversations with our teammates specific to racial and ethnic diversity. Our executive leadership team participated in those. Our board participated in those. And out of that, we announced in our first ever Truist Corporate Social Responsibility Report that we are going to have a goal of moving our percentage of senior leadership that's racially and ethnically diverse from 11.9% to 15% over a 3-year period. And so I'm really proud that we're not only talking about it at the leadership level, but we share this information not just with our teammates, but with those out in the public so that they know that it's important to us. And I'm hoping that these opportunities create that sense of, I'm no longer invisible, and Truist is a place for me to learn and grow my career. Jelisa? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you did my job. Jelisa?
Just following up. So with EY in particular, there's, I think we had actually taken some steps maybe a couple of years ago, in particular in our local office around the shooting that happened in Charlotte with a police officer, where we started having conversations, and it was called the Are You Okay campaign. And it really dealt around just really asking someone how they're doing. And that kind of, I'd say now we've kind of doubled down on that with to Wendy's point, the George Floyd era. And we've started to say, how can we make sure that our minorities, and obviously there is a focus on the Black community, but how can we make sure that all of our minority groups are having the opportunities and feel that they aren't, to your point, Adam, in your question, overlooked? And so we are currently focusing in efforts around reviewing and improving all of our internal policies and practices around making sure people that get certain type of experiences, whether it's a project or a certain type of if there's a new campaign, so RPA or artificial intelligence, as those things start to come into the market, are we making sure that everyone gets an equal opportunity to get those experiences? If there's a new account, Wendy just brought up Truist and the combination. Are we making sure that people are getting those right opportunities? So it's more focused around those. We've also launched where we historically, as being a Big Four firm, we did not have Martin Luther King Day off. We have now, as a firm, fully employed that as a holiday. And it is a day of understanding for us to be able to, one, get together, but also be able to go out in the community and learn more about the things that we don't know about. I mean, I will say, myself, there were things that I needed to learn and educate myself on as I had conversations within the workplace. So it's making sure that we truly understand as a culture how people are feeling and what's going on. Another thing that we've done recently is we did donations to 4 HBCUs I want to make sure, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about $1 million each. So it was $4 million across the board. We've also donating to $3 million to nonprofits that are fighting for social justice. And then we have also the last one. We are also empowering our local offices to do what makes sense for the office. So it's not like, hey, you got to run these, ideas or things up the chain. What you need to do for your local environment, our office managing partners and partners are empowered to make those decisions and do what needs to be done. And so I think that has probably made the most immediate impact, is that you have people that are on the ground and know what's happening. In particular, around when there were different, situations across the country, we were able to quickly react and be able to say, hey, let's have conversations, or, let's change this policy, or let's get together and talk about these things. And so I think one of the things that made it probably more impactful, at least from my perspective, is that it's not a one size fits all. There are some things that we do at an overarching level, but then we're also able to kind of cascade things down where particular areas need maybe a little bit more attention than others. Did that answer your question, Adam?
I should say it did. That's awesome. I love hearing it. And I think what we'll see throughout this in this entire conversation is there's also a sense of intentionality that starts to come through in the things and the programs and what we're trying to do in our different firms. But also organizations can take advantage of the perspective of the diverse workforce only if leaders and employees enjoy a sense of inclusion, right? with a McKinsey and Company defined as, in their paper, inclusion is the degree to which an individual feels that their authentic selves are welcomed at work, enabling them to contribute in a meaningful and deliberate manner. So, Wendy, can you tell us a little bit of how we are doing this at Truist? How are we helping people truly become inclusive?
Sure. So we call it bringing your best self to work. Sometimes the authenticity of who we are doesn't necessarily need to be in the workplace. So I am all for having people bring their best selves to work. And that includes not having to hide a part of who you are. A lot of what we do really focuses around our business resource group. So you'll hear me mention those often. And although we have 8 focused around variety of dimensions of diversity, we open them up to anyone who wants to learn, grow, and really lean into how do we build across difference. It gives teammates an opportunity to learn about other parts of the organization, leveraging their skills, leveraging their strengths that they may not have the opportunity to do in their day job. And so we tout that through various communication vehicles, whether it's the newsletters that we put out every month, our corporate intranet site. We have a very strong partnership with the Truist Leadership Institute, which is our learning arm that not only educates leaders inside of Truist, but educates leaders in our communities. And so we leverage their podcast series. They have a magazine where we now have a column in there where we spotlight different teammates. And so we want teammates to know that we're celebrating these differences, which we hope then allows teammates to be able to, authentically bring themselves into the workplace. Also really pleased to share that we launched this month the ability for our teammates to identify their orientation and identity inside of our Workday system, our human capital platform, and encouraging teammates to put their personal pronouns in their email signatures as well. And so we want to, continue to listen to our teammates and provide the opportunities, celebrate those opportunities so that they know we truly do want them to be 100% who they are inside of the organization.
That's awesome. Jelisa, how about for E&Y?
I think, I'm telling you, Wendy takes all the good answers. I think we're doing, most of the same thing. So it's the over communication, making sure people feel that, they know what's going on. If there's different cultural holidays, let's make sure we communicate them, let them know, what people know things are happening. And in particular with being a professional services firm, your team is kind of always changing. So there's not necessarily this constant steady of things that, you meet the same group of people and you just keep working with them. It does happen, but there's always usually some different folks in there. And so we're definitely using our resource groups to make sure we communicate those things out. As I mentioned in the last question, the empowerment, in particular, an example of that is when everything happened with the George Floyd situation, a group of, I think there was about 80 senior managers, Black senior managers across the firm, got together and kind of pulled together our recommendations, completely, agnostic of the firm's plan and everything else, but pulled together our list of recommendations on saying how we wanted the firm to respond and our expectations. And the firm embraced that and built a team to help partner with us to say, hey, how do we incorporate these recommendations into the broader plan that we have? And so I think that empowerment is impactful, because it's one thing to, start top down to push inclusion, but it really happens in the everyday conversations and seeing, being able to see, hey, a couple of people from your local office were involved in this, spur of the moment initiative. It definitely showed that, hey, your voices are heard. And so I think listening has been one of the key things we've also pushed for, is talk less, listen more. And on that note, I'll pass it back to you for the next question.
Thank you. Stephen, I was just wondering, from the Google perspective, if you had any insights onto this, because I know Google has done a lot in this area as well, too.
Yeah, so, first let me just say this has been a tremendously difficult year. So I cannot just understate or even overstate just the amount of work that we've had to do and the amount of work that all of us have had to overcome. It has not been easy. Having said that, it was beneficial that Google already had some things in place that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion and promote a sense of belonging. It's grounded in the mission. Our mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. The key word is universally, right? And so we already had that grounded in our mission. And then comes everything that's happened this year, and we've just had to accelerate some of the programs that we've had in place, similar to the other panelists. I would say one of the things that we've realized is that information is key. Not everyone is able to respond as quickly as we want them to. Not everyone feels that they're in a safe enough environment to communicate that. And so we created a lot of community places where people could just come in, and there was absolutely there was nothing that we were asking of them but to just commune, just tell us how you feel, and just come together in a process of well-being. So that was important. Once that was done, then we did a lot of what Jelisa said, which is top-down and bottom-up. What are some of the recommendations that we can make to the company? And I'm proud to say our CEO, Sundar, was very, very open and very vocal about Google's commitment. We created a campaign, the Search for Racial Equity. So I encourage you to Google it. But there's a lot of talks that we're having in this specific domain of racial equity, where we have YouTube videos, where we have a lot of people that we're bringing in to have discussions that are key to informing folks, especially managers, on how to deal with racial equity. And the last thing I would say is putting systems in place that allow people to call out when things happen. I mean, there's the racial inequities that may happen that are obvious to all, but there's also microaggressions. How can you put systems in place where people can say, hey, time out, that was not really cool, right? So putting those systems in place is something that we've done as well.
That's excellent. That is excellent.
Hey, Adam, if you don't mind, Stephen, would you mind talking a little bit more about those systems? I'm really interested in them.
All right. So a lot of what we do at Google is, I would say, we try to be independent of a person, right? So if you're a sponsor or a champion that has a cause, what happens when you leave? And someone else comes in? How do you ensure that you create a system which allows unbiasing, which allows inclusion during meetings? So some of the things that we do is we have, it's pretty cool. We have like a sheet of paper that we put in meeting rooms, and it talks about inclusion. What are the things that we want you to do in the meeting purposefully to ensure that people are included? Are you talking a lot? Are you talking less? In fact, it's funny you asked that. We have with Meets, I don't know if Zoom has this feature, but in Meets, we introduced a feature a little widget that actually tells you how much you're talking, how much you're listening, and it has all these facial expressions to really nudge you to say, maybe you're talking too much. You need to give someone else an opportunity to talk. We have little widgets that allow you to raise your hand, because some people, remember, in the vein of inclusion, not everyone is vocal. Some people may want to sort of raise their hand and not be, have the spotlight put on them. So just creating those little product features that allow or enable a system of inclusion that's independent of someone. And we can totally talk more offline and see what we can do to assist you with some of those things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have to pay attention to that when I'm in a Google Hangout next time, because I probably get a frowny face more than I realize. So thank you for letting us know that that's there. I'll pay attention to the faces. But I think this is an interesting kind of segue, really, because the next thing I want to talk about is D&I can sometimes be a topic that's not very comfortable for some people to have. When I think about some tough conversations that I've had with all the recent social unrest that we've had, I've had to answer a lot of questions around white privilege. Tell us, though, about a time when you guys had some tough conversations, and how was that resolved? Jelisa, I think that you had some great insights on this.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, in particular with the recent events, and us not necessarily being together per se, in the workplace. We kind of bounce as the events of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and as these events happen, you kind of just bounce from meeting to meeting. You didn't necessarily have those moments to kind of think about them in their full totality. And so I can remember the moment that I had a conversation with my leadership team, and I actually said to them, it was actually a Saturday morning, I woke up and I was like, they haven't reached out to me to see how I'm doing. And for me, it's not that, as I said, I'm a breast cancer survivor, so I know that these people genuinely care about me, but they were dropping the ball. And so I reached out to them and I said, hey, I want you guys to know that as a Black American right now, I'm not okay. I'm not. I was like, I have fear in doing my morning walk if it's not light enough, because I don't know if it's going to take one person that's not going to like the color of my skin and decide to do something. And I said, if I'm feeling this way, I know others are. And so as a leadership team, I need you guys to, step up to the plate and ask me how I'm doing. And they immediately said, I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what to say. And they said, they all said to me, and it literally they could have been in a text group, saying the exact same things, but I definitely don't think they were. But they said, tell me how I can do this better. And I told them, I said, what you're going to do is have to ask for grace. I can't necessarily tell you how to speak to every person that's impacted by this, because every person is going to feel different. But you do have to speak up. Being a leader in these times isn't easy, and you have to have the tough conversations regardless. And so you're going to have to go out and have these conversations. But as you have them, ask for grace, that you may not speak on them from a position of knowledge, but you are speaking from them from a position of care. And if you go into the conversations like that, you will walk away with some positive responses. And so for me, it was almost it was a tough conversation because I had to be vulnerable. I had to let them know, but I also walked away from that conversation knowing that I helped them be able to help others. And I think that's where you have to get to in these kind of tough conversations, is putting yourself out there so that you can make a conversation easier for someone else. Stephen, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this is a tough one. To be honest, there's no easy answer here, right? Sometimes I think it's as simple as just defining what privilege is and leaving it at that. But then at other times, and being very, very cognizant of how the person is feeling, right? But then that becomes really burdensome, because all the time you almost feel like you're always asking for permission, always giving grace to others. And it's a difficult balance. Sometimes you just have to be bold and say, hey, this is what privilege is. And by the way, it's okay. It's not a bad thing. This is not like, I hear the word used a lot, suffering Olympic suffering. But I like the notion of comparative suffering. I'm not trying to outdo you in the suffering scale, right? These are not two things that are competing against one another. This is a complementary thing. And for a lot of us, a lot of people who have been impacted, not only historically, but by what has happened, but more specifically this year, a time comes when we have to be bold and call, privilege what it is, whether it's white privilege or not. And so I think sometimes we do create space to be sensitive and to make sure the other person sees what we mean by saying white privilege. But I'm on the opinion that sometimes we need to be bold and just call it out. And that's okay.
Wow. And then, Wendy, Truist has already established a reputation of having these hard conversations. I think of the Colin Kaepernick kneeling down, and you led some great, bold conversations at the bank. Some final thoughts for us on this topic?
Yeah, I think because in this instance, we're talking about race, and a lot of times I will add gender to that conversation. People on the other end or the privileged end of it feels like, having this thing that you have no control over makes you a bad person. And so I like to use analogies, right? Real life experiences that help people to understand and take it away from something that's so personal and so emotional. And I have a teammate, Charlene McNeil, on the team who's left-handed. She and I have worked together for 4 years. She lives here in Atlanta. We share office space together. And it wasn't until we were having lunch, I was rushed. And, I'm trying to figure out why she's not eating. Like, why aren't you eating your lunch? And she was like, well, I can't eat because I'm left-handed. And so I flippantly said, what's today? Left-handed people don't eat day? And she was like, no, if I try to eat when you're eating, then we bump elbows. And we spent the rest of the time at lunch talking about how she's been socialized as a left-handed person to basically eat her food cold, right? And it wasn't that I didn't care about her or that I don't care about her. It just was not my experience. I live in a world that was built for right-handed people. And if you can find ways to bring the story around, your message around in a way that is more appetizing for people, you break down some of those barriers to be able to then have some real meaningful conversation. I'll also say that I don't think everybody needs to lead these dialogues. I don't think everybody needs to lead the conversation, because we want to believe that we are leading this work and we are living in organizations that are leading this from the top. But there are a wide array of teammates that have varied opinions. And so we leverage leaders who have been actively engaged in our BRGs. Again, I'll bring those up. Or leaders that have reached out and said, hey, I've had this experience and I really would like for you to help me, lead some of the dialogue and conversations. For the 300 sessions that I mentioned, my 4 diversity, equity, and inclusion leads that are dedicated to the business, and I led all of those sessions. We didn't bring anybody else in. We led those sessions ourselves because we knew the conversation would be tough, and we wanted to ensure that the people there could actually steer the conversation back in a fruitful way and not create dissension. And we received so much positive feedback from those sessions. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that on June 1st, our CEO called me up and said, Wendy, I want to spend time with our BOLD, that's our African-American BRG, the BOLD leadership team. And so we called in all the regional chairs, the enterprise leads, as well as the 2 executive sponsors. And he spent that 90 minutes just listening and seeking to understand. And he took the information back and he said, we're going to act on these 5 things. They asked for these 4. I'm going to ask for this 5th one. And we've done some things both inside the organization and outside of the organization that really made me proud.
Wow. Well, guys, I cannot thank you enough. I mean, can you believe it? We've already run out of time, and we have really not even scratched the surface of this topic. I appreciate all of you giving of your time, your talents, your wisdoms, your insights. This has been an amazing conversation. I know that anytime I interact with any one of the 3 of you, I walk away a better person, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with us today. Thank you guys again so much for the giving of your time, your talents, your insights. This is a conversation that obviously we all can continue to have, and we have just barely scratched the surface of it. I know that I walk away a better person every time I interact with any one of the 3 of you. So truly, Jelisa, Steve, and Wendy, thank you so much for being here. I know that this panel is a success because I had you guys, and I cannot thank you enough. And also, I'd like to thank everybody for participating, being a part of today's panel. And we welcome you guys to stick around because we're about to go to a live Q&A session. So we'll see you in that next section. Hey, and welcome back, everybody. I am joined again by my same group of panelists. I have Stephen Ichatha, Jelisa, and Wendy McSweeney with me as well, and we're very excited to be back together again. We had quite a great conversation a few weeks ago, so I am really looking forward to continuing it today. How's everybody doing this afternoon? Hey, and welcome back, everybody. I am joined again by my same panelists. So, moving on. Glad to have everybody back. You know, one of the things that I think Phyllis was talking about yesterday was being bold in leadership, and how in the D&I space, when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, leadership has to be bold. So one of the questions that we have today that I would like to throw out to all three of you is, how do you help your leadership be bold in their actions, in their leading of DE&I initiatives at your respective firms? Stephen, what we talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, leadership has to be bold. So one of the questions that we have today that I would like to throw out to all three of you is, how do you... Oh, sorry, I think we were muted on this side, so sorry. So one of the things that Phyllis talked about yesterday was being bold in leadership when it comes to DE&I initiatives. So one of our questions coming through is, how are you helping your leadership being bold in their DE&I initiatives and leading them in your respective firms? Stephen, why don't we start with you? Sorry, I think we were muted on this side, so sorry. So one of the things
Hey, Adam, I must say this is not easy, right? So the first thing we have to do is recognize that it's extremely difficult, but it's also extremely necessary, right? We need to create an environment that allows us to have these type of conversations. And also we need to trust that the parties that we're having these conversations with are resilient enough, right? And that they're bold enough to have these conversations. At the same time, we need to be cognizant that everyone is in a different place mentally, right? So some people are closer and some people are further away. So we need to acknowledge that. And then lastly, it's not a one size fits all. It's something that we need to be able to do regardless of where other parties are, right? So we have to be careful and be able to measure where the different people are so that we can expose ourselves to this type of conversations. At the end of it all, it's trying to put that relatable experience, right? What is it that they can relate to? And also to show that these efforts are complementary and not an issue of comparative suffering. So it's very important to do that. But I would say at the end of it all, we have to trust people are resilient. We have to put the practices in place that allow us to have these conversations because they have to be had. There's no pushing them under the covers.
So,
I think one of the things, and I definitely agree with Stephen, is I constantly remind my leadership team that if we aren't uncomfortable talking about how we want to go about affecting the change that we're trying to, then we aren't pushing hard enough. So we have to get out of the comfort zone. And to Stephen's point, have those difficult conversations and know that you're not always going to be able to, you're not going to always agree. But if you are open and vulnerable and have those dialogues, you're allowing other people to see your perspective. Very similar to the example that Wendy mentioned in our last conversation about being the left-handed and the right-handed situation. That shifted her perspective. Not that they necessarily say that, Wendy's going to remember every time she goes out to eat now, but it shifts the dialogue to say, I am now aware of it and I'm cognizant of it. So I can choose to ignore it and continue to have others feel that they don't have, equity in the organization, or I can shift and say, hey, look, if I make this one tweak, I could change someone's entire experience. And I would say out of probably 10 people, I would definitely bet on the fact that you're going to get 7 to 8 that want to make that shift. They just don't know how. And this dialogue is where you start. So it's about getting uncomfortable. Getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
And then Wendy, how about from the Truist perspective?
Hi, Adam. Yes, I think the one sweet spot is really engaging your leaders, and that's your executive leadership team as well as your board in the decision making, right? As owners of the work and the space, we're charged with bringing together the best practices, ideation, sharing it across the organization. But until leaders see themselves as owning and really driving the results, it's hard. So definitely engaging your executive leadership team as well as your board of directors and designing a strategy that they feel comfortable leading has been the huge sweet spot in how we've been able to see so much progress in, I would say, a relatively short period of time as an organization.
Wow. So I think we're coming up kind of close on our end of our time for our Q&A session, which is unbelievable. I know this group, we could sit down and have an hour-long conversation. I absolutely love it. But really quick, let's have one final question. Wendy, I'm going to stick with you to start with on this one. Kind of some of the theme that you hear underlying through this entire Converge event is, if you strip it all away, you're looking at intentionality, right? And I actually read some articles that said you could try to have the best DE&I practices in the world. You could go try to hire the best diverse minds that are out there into your organization. But if you don't have intentionality behind your program, behind the why, if you don't have that intention behind the why of why you're doing DE&I, it really starts to just become a slogan or a banner or kind of a check the box exercise. It doesn't become culture. Right? So starting with you, Wendy, because I know you and I have had a lot of conversations over this. Talk to us a little bit about intentionality behind a DE&I strategy and why that's so important.
Well, I think one of the great things that we have in our favor at Truist is our purpose. Our shared purpose of being is to inspire and build better lives and communities. And that's for everyone. Not just for the wealthy, not just for the underserved, but for each and every person's life that we touch. And, creating the strategy with that purpose in mind. For our teammates, our mission is to ensure that they have inclusive and engaging experiences so that they can have the greatest career, which includes growth and opportunity. So the words that we choose to live by, our actions guide what we're doing. And I see diversity, equity, and inclusion being right at the center of that.
Lisa, from the E&Y perspective, where you sit in some of your teams and business teams that you put together, how are you seeing intentionality play out in the DE&I strategies and initiatives?
I mean, it's very simple. I mean, if you're not intentional about it, you're likely not going to be able to have the success that you're trying to. Anything that you pursue, you have to be intentional. You have to set goals, you have to set measurements, and you have to make sure that you're tracking progress and be honest with yourself. I think part of being intentional, the flip side of it is being aware and saying, hey, look, we missed a goal, but how do we go back and say, how do we address it and change it so that we don't miss it the next time? So I think the other part of being intentional that I see playing a very, lock and step piece of it is being self-aware and knowing where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are so that you can be intentional in the things that really matter for your strategy and your organization. And so what we are doing is having the conversations about how will we measure success? What are our goals? And setting some stretch goals so that we can make sure that, hey, if we miss them, what do they say? If you, shoot for the stars, and if you hit the moon, it's still progress. And so I think one of the things that we really try to focus on is being intentional in driving how we will do things, but then also being self-aware and knowing where we need to be doing the driving.
That's awesome. And then Stephen, final thoughts on intentionality, especially in Google and in your teams as you guys are performing all of the networking that we've all come to rely on.
Thank you for calling that out, Adam. I do want to put sort of the three words that you talked about today: being bold, right? Being intentional. And I'll add this one: that's what drives accountability. I'm very proud of what Google is doing. We have the racial commitments, or the commitments to racial equity, that are available online for everyone to see. And by putting the intentionality behind those commitments, then we hold ourselves accountable. I do want to quote one of our Googlers who repetitively says, if you do not intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. So if you think that things are going to happen by default, then by practice, you're just going to exclude folks instead of putting a system that intentionally includes them. So I think it's important for all of us to make sure that we design the systems in place that will then drive intentionality and bold behavior that will then drive accountability.
Stephen, that is excellent. Thank you so very much. And thank you so much to all of my panelists today. I cannot tell you what an honor it was to have all three of you sit down with us, give us some of your time, give us your knowledge, give us your insights. From my deepest soul, I thank all three of you for your time, for your work, your energy. Thank you again.